Welcome. My name is Will Hasty. Thank you all for coming this evening. 30 years ago, something truly extraordinary was happening in the world. For those of us who can think back that 30-year period without a lot of difficulty. The world was changing before our eyes. Something had happened that people thought could never possibly happen. It was one of those things that would never in a million years happen. The Berlin Wall was coming down. It was like an accident. This thing that had caused so much damage and death, destruction, and had divided the world. Imagine Berlin, 1989, right around this period of time. It was a very consequential period of time. Clearly, much had to be done politically to pull everything together back in the direction of reunification, and this is what happened. But it was a moment. It was perhaps a rare moment in human history, and it's certainly worth revisiting. And that's one of the purposes of the events that we are holding this fall. We have been holding walls-related events in the past, but I think this one is of particular importance because it is the 30-year commemoration of the fall of the Berlin Wall, November 9th, 1989. The Campus Weeks event. So fortunately, we have had help putting on events here at the University of Florida over the years pertaining to walls, and the Berlin Wall in particular, with the help of the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. And they have typically been called Campus Weeks events, and this is the third time we have had Campus Weeks events. And in connection with these Campus Weeks events, we typically have guest speakers. The first time we had Campus Weeks events was in 2009, so that was the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and here we are already 10 years later. Wie die Zeit vergeht, how time flies. I was eager to try to do justice to this moment to the degree possible. It's not an easy thing to do, but to give some sort of importance to it, to capture some of that enthusiasm, some of that exhilaration, some of that joy from that moment in 1989, yet to temper that perhaps with a sense of what is going on culturally, what has been going on culturally, with respect to walls, and without being overly negative, to present a picture that is perhaps at least somewhat more realistic. And so the title of the Campus Weeks events that we came up with for this fall, as you know, is Setting Global Cultural Limits 30 Years After Berlin, 1989. And we already had a pre-modern speaker, David Fry, who wrote, I think, a pretty interesting book on walls, focusing on walls as structures in their relationship to civilization. And our second speaker, whom I would like to welcome tonight, is Susanne Götze. And she is a environmental journalist. She earned her a joint German-French doctorate in modern history from Potsdam-Lorraine, I believe, University of Potsdam and Lorraine, so in history, so a trained historian, but you've basically spent your career as an environmental journalist, writing, I think building up a substantial corpus of writings, articles, texts for really mainstream important German periodicals, just some of which, for example, Der Spiegel Online, Süddeutsche Zeitung, Deutschlandfunk, Zeit Online, Der Standard, die Blätter für deutsche und internationale Politik. Not too long ago, Susanne published her first book-length journalistic presentation of effects of climate change around the world called Land unter im Paradies. Take a look at that book, look at the front page, it's Florida. The picture, it's Florida. I don't know if that's actually a picture of Florida. I look at that picture, I see Florida. I feel fortunate that Susanne was ready, willing, and able to come to Florida to talk to us. These are international issues that we're trying to deal with. We have to develop ways to approach problems. They're multifarious. They're very difficult, and the problems are global. The solutions are going to have to be global. But I think a path towards perhaps getting somewhere positive is going to be exchanges such as the one that we're having today and tomorrow with Dr. Götze. Now, that was just your first book. You have another book. I'm not going to say too much about that, but I know you just recently finished another book, and you'll have opportunity to talk about that. I'll let you let us know about that when you're ready. And so I think without further ado, I will turn things over to Susanne Götze. Thank you for coming.
Hello, it's function? You hear me? Because my voice is not Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, Will, for inviting me. I met Will the first time 4 months ago in Prenzlauer Berg. It's like a district of Berlin, in a coffee shop called Sowohl als auch, next to my house. And we talked, and the first time he came to me and wrote me, I said, wow, what a crazy thing. You know, you have like a literature or history professor from the States asking me as an environmental journalist to talk about walls and climate change. So I told him in Germany would have never happened, because this is kind of interdisciplinary thinking we don't have so much in Germany. I miss it because I like a lot. As Will said, I studied not biology or these kind of things. I study history and literature, and now I'm doing, I'm writing my whole life about climate change. So this is a kind of interdisciplinary thinking I like, and I love really to come here and to do this kind of speech, which is, yeah, very special, and I think not possible if you have like a very, how to say, channeled view or perspective on science. So, yeah, and Florida, yeah, just for the introduction. It's also funny because it's Florida, you know. I was here like 3 years ago and doing my, my investigation about the Florida Keys. I will tell you about this later. And then, like 1 year ago, my book came out with 15 stories about climate change in the whole world, and the cover was an image of Florida because of this one story I have in it. And also Land unter im Paradies, this title, I don't know if you can translate Land unter, no, it's like an untranslatable expression in German. And this is also was the title of the Florida story in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and is now the title of the book also. So, you know, everything is connected. And then Will came, and so it's a third time I have my story, a personal story with Florida, and this is very, yeah, very interesting, very funny, very coincidental also. So, Yeah. So speaking about me, I'd like to start my speech with my personal story, to introduce you and to take you for a journey from Berlin to Florida to Africa and to all different kinds of thinking, narratives. And yeah, I think there will be like 40 or 50 minutes of a bright, long journey in very different kind of spaces and locations and sorts. I hope you will enjoy it and we can discuss later, and I'm very also interested in having some exchange with you and with your point of view, which is, I'm sure, completely another point of view I have, because we are living in different parts of the world. So, my personal story I'm starting with. This is me and my brother, and my mother, my brother and I. The reason why I want to start with my story is simple. Walls. What is your title from your events, or the bigger title of your events you're having this year? Walls for me have a very real meaning. It's like history is not an abstract story for me, and walls is not an abstract thing for me. Is not like a story from a land from far, far away. History and walls are a very real thing when you feel it and when you have it in your life. When the Berlin Wall came down, I was only 9 years old, and when the reunification in Germany took place, it was in 1990, I was only 10. So here on these pictures, I'm like 7 or 8. It was like before the wall came down. I lived my childhood in the GDR, a so-called socialistic and democratic country. I think today there's no doubt that it wasn't democratic and socialistic. Well, I don't think it was socialistic either. The wall was a part of my life as we lived in East Berlin. So, and just to come up with any prejudice, we were not hungry. But of course we don't have a lot of things to buy, and I know there's existing a lot of, I think from Western people, a lot of images how it was in GDR, like a horror country where you don't have enough to eat. All this is bullshit. But the truth is, of course, we didn't have the same standard as you have in the West, but we have enough to live. So as to give you a little expression, this is like little depressing black and white photographies from the East. In our supermarkets, we have like only one sort of soap, one sort of butter. The choice was limited, but this was not the problem we have in our daily lives. I mean, it was not that we are crying all the day that we cannot consume enough or not more products. The bigger problem was another. The bigger problem for my parents was that they couldn't travel. So one of their passions was to travel. And well, actually we could travel, but only in some countries, as you see here. So it was like only the eastern countries. It was like Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania and Czechoslovakia. And of course we did camping because this was this is what Eastern Germans do, because they don't have a lot of money to go to hotels. And was also much more fun. So, and I pretty enjoyed my childhood, like between camping and one sort of butter. I didn't have any problems at all. Till I get a little kind of political consciousness. Like with 8 or 9, you start to ask questions, and you ask your parents, okay, in your city is a wall, and what about this wall? What's happening? Why I cannot go on the other side? You start asking questions when you're in this age. And in this moment, I was about 8 or 9, my parents told me, you will perhaps never see the other side. And this phrase was burned into my brain, you know. For a child, a phrase which includes never is something mysterious, something strange. How did they know? Was there really no possibility to cross over? And as a child, you start to consider all the possibilities that might do it, you know, so that you would overcome this obstacle, like this forbidden thing is like a mysterious thing, you know, your fantasy is going to work. Yeah, so this had told me some months before, and then suddenly it happened. And for me it was like, what? They told me I will never cross this line. I don't understand what happened. For me it was like very magical, this moment, because one evening they told me, yeah, the fall of the wall. And this was the beginning of a new Germany without separation. We had suffered for nearly 30 years, or especially I have suffered for 9 years, my parents for 30 years. And it was, of course, it was a kind of relief. One fewer wall in this world, full of dangerous borders, and not only, and this is very important also, not only in Berlin. It's not about Berlin also, about Eastern and Western Germany. It was also about Warsaw and Paris, about Zagreb and Rome, Kiev and Lisbon, etc. So the wall, of course, was the biggest thing. It's not only about Germany, and often we forget the Eastern countries. So it was a real liberation, and as well said, it was really a magical moment. And I remember this moment. This is the Bornholmer Straße, and the S-Bahn station, metro station, and this is the Bornholmer Bridge, Bornholmer Brücke, and there was like a checkpoint before, and as this was the first time when it was opened and people crossed the bridge. And I remember it was not the evening we were there in '89. And in the 9th of November, we were the 10th of November in the morning, we crossed the bridge together with my parents, because then they were sure that there was no shooting, etc., because in this moment we didn't know what happened. So we went there, and I remember when we crossed the bridge, on the other side were standing the Western people and received us with a big welcome. It was like a big hug, and they give a lot of presents. For me, chocolate. I remember this because I don't like chocolate, and I was like, what? I don't like chocolate. But of course, it was a nice thing, and for my brother, a car, and they give a lot of things. So it was really like, okay, a moment of love, if you want. Yeah, you have not a lot of historical moments like this where people are like hugging each other and loving each other, if you want. But moments are only moments, and the liberation became frustration for a lot of Eastern Germans, and this process I want to describe now, to tempt or to stop a little bit the euphoria. Also 30 years after, when we hear now in the media in Germany, like everybody is stuck in this moment, but a lot of people forget what come after and what happened after. So a lot of the Eastern Germans lose their jobs, and the Western businessmen swooped in to buy cheap Eastern companies for speculation and to destroy competitive businesses called Volkseigen, which have previously been owned by the GDR state. So capitalism sweep in to buy the socialist infrastructure. My father, for example, lost his job and got in one Maßnahme. This is a kind of program from the job center. And in one after the other, he never got to work again. And so a lot of Eastern Germans feel betrayed, you know. It's like they're treated like losers, and they had less money in the West, they had less pensions, they have less inheritance, less property, and this situation continues till today. So here we see, for example, the unemployment rate. The green line, when you have here the green line, this is like Eastern Germany, and this is Western Germany. Of course, also we have a kind of recession in the 90s, etc. You know, but it's not on the same level. Just to show you, this is not the same. And here you have also the unemployment rates. And you see that the eastern part of Germany is much more red, so means it's up to 20% of unemployment. And this is in 97, you know, like was not only some years, it like continues in the whole 90s. Yeah, and why less pensions, less inheritance? Till today, you have different system of pensions. You know, they didn't like harmonize the two systems completely, so the people are frustrated. Why I get less pension than the people in the West? Less inheritance because there was no private property in the GDR. So, for example, my friends my friends circle, nobody have an inheritance, myself neither. So when I have colleagues from the West and they tell me, yeah, my grandmother died and I have 1,000 euros, 100,000 euros or something like this, for me it's like, oh, wow, this money just like this, you know, for us is unbelievable. So just to give you an impression of the materialistic facts. So, but it was not only about money. This is also important to understand. It was also about identity. Their identity from the Eastern people were damaged. A few months before, I showed you the image here, we think back here. A few months before, they had been seen as some kinds of heroes of the liberation. Now, there were the poor Eastern Germans begging for money from the West. And within some months only. We have to imagine this narrative change within some months. And the Eastern people felt like a kind of arrogance from the West that didn't help much either. So perhaps when you try to imagine the situation, think the other way round. The US or Florida, your system changed into socialism from one day to another. And but some people come and tell you everything you lived until now is wrong. So they explain you how socialism works and why the system is more effective and more fair. And they say everything you lived now, for everything like Starbucks or the Mark, the brands, the malls, everything is wrong. And now we need to switch to another system because it's more fair, it's more better, etc. So everything you lived in your life is worthless. So this kind of feeling had the socialist people. So the sociologist, sorry, this is not my mother tongue, Wilhelm Heidmeier from the University of Bielefeld in Germany calls this phenomenon the fatal feeling of Kontrollverlust, is the feeling of losing control. And I quote him because I do only 3 quotes in this speech, but this is a really good quote, I think, to understand what happened. He said, against the background of global capitalism featuring rapid financial capitalism, social disintegration processes and depleted democracy, many insecurities are transferred into a large part of a society. The authoritarian response is the attempt to re-establish control. So, here we have this, what he explained in his quote. We can read in these figures. I just translated you 2 of them, and this show exactly what happened. Till today, you must imagine these figures are from 1819, so from this year and the last year. This was much higher in the 90s, but still 30 years after you have these kinds of figures. So the East, when they ask the people if they feel political powerlessness, so in the East ask this kind of 37% of the people say yes, and in the West is like 10 less. So it doesn't mean this kind of feelings or a lack of identity don't exist in the West, but I want to show you that it's much bigger in the East. And the same is, for example, if you ask the people, we live in a democracy, you know, and you can write articles, you can become journalists. You know, I'm a journalist, I know that there is a freedom of opinion. But if you ask the people, okay, is there a lack of freedom of opinion, then they say yes. And in the East, it's nearly the half of the people who say they cannot, they don't have a freedom of opinion, you know, and they live the GDR. They know what it is like when they cannot say their opinion, you know, but they say it now. You know, this is what is interesting. But also in the West you have these people, and this is important to understand also, that it's not only an Eastern German problem, but they have a bigger problem with this. This of course is true. The same here with other kind of right-wing identities, if you want. You have xenophobia in the East also is higher than in the West. So you have 23 to 17. The same is with discrimination of Muslims, discrimination of asylum seekers. All these figures, when you see, are mostly higher in the East than in the West. I think the only where it's not the case is like the homosexual people, because this in the East is not very much important in general. You know, like you don't. But this is like another discourse. So why it is like this? And so we go a little back in the history. We can say after the fall of the wall, we create new borders. Not just between Germans and Germans, again, because they have a kind of problem with each other, but also between Germans and foreigners. And these walls, as we call this, Mauern in the Kopf, are walls in the head. The reason of is a feeling of losing control, as Mr. Heidmeier said, and the lack of identity. So beyond the social problems and the sensation that globalization and capitalism were rolling over their lives, many East Germans also felt that their past was useless and worthless. So as I said already, so some of them, not all but a part, needed a kind of new identity and a faith in something. And this is, I don't tell you something new, you have this, this is like the problem in all the world. When people search identity, they can easily swoop in like right-wing identities where you have a clear enemy. So, and this is what happened also in Eastern Germany. So pogroms and attacks against people seeking protection and asylum were only the beginning of a resurgent nationalism in Germany. The first big attack was in 1992, 2 years after the reunification. In Lichtenhagen, Rostock, as you see it in the middle, there are not a lot of photos from this time, but this is like the most important. So they set fire in the center of where people live who ask for asylum. And in the following 15 years, right-wing terrorists killed 10 innocent people and tried to kill 43 people. It was like the beginning of the right terrorism in Germany. So after the liberation of the wall, we faced other walls. Walls of nationalism, walls of social exclusion, walls in our heads built up from disappointment, mistrust and lack of identity. So 30 years later, today, we come back to today, these walls still stand today between East and West and between Germans and migrants. This is like a photo of a manifestation or a protest which we have every Monday in Dresden. Dresden is like a East German city. And the people who demonstrating from, it's called Pegida, it's a kind of right-wing association and very close to the new party, the Alternative für Deutschland, the new right-wing party AfD. And yeah, they're coming together every Monday and it's like, it's year for years, it's like this now. So, but it's not only on the street. We have a new flagship in the right-wing flagship in the parliament. This is, perhaps you already heard about this, Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative to Germany. And we see that it's the main opposition in the parliament. So it's not just we are talking about some few right-wing people. Today they are leading the opposition in the German parliament. And if you have told me this like 5 years ago, I would say, ah, come on, no, it's not that it's not that bad, and it's not that it won't happen, you know. Nobody thought that it will happen like this, you know. And today we have a coalition from the Union and the Social Democrats, and the opposition leader is the AfD. So we're here. Yeah, it's my translation. I will, moment, I don't know why I'm here. Oh, man. Okay, yeah. So I don't know if it's without mistakes, but I just wanted to give you this impression that we talk about the same thing. What is populism? It's important to make a little definition to understand what we are talking about. So first, this phenomenon of rising nationalism can be seen in a lot of countries. Of course, it's not an Eastern German problem, but I wanted to start with how nationalism can grow out of walls and come back to walls. That's why I started with this. This world, it seemed, is more divided while at the same time connected as ever before. We all know this. We have nationalist leaders in countries like the US, we have Brazil, many European countries, Russia, to name a few. And there is no doubt that there is a need of national identity, and this is strong again. For example, in 7 countries of Europe, we have right-wing populists are part of the government. So it's not only opposition, they are already in governments. So, and now I want to come to what is this kind of populism. And I just quoted because, as I said, I wanted to come back to a better understanding that we are not talking only with empty words, but we know what we mean altogether. Populism idealizes the people and builds hostility towards the elite. Populism tells the story of the elite deceived people. Due to the leader, the people realize that they are oppressed by corrupted elite. So the people, das Volk, the people, choose the way of his liberation. And in the end, so promises populism, the power return to the people. This is the narrative we're dealing with, and we will see that it's what we can, that's the reason why populists can not only the migration crisis for the discourse or for the narrative, but also other narratives function with this kind of strategy or narrative strategy. So, come back to the German people. The Eastern German people were betrayed first by the corrupt socialist system before the wall came down. And then today many of them have still the feeling to be in the opposition against the regime again. So they have this, they have the feeling, okay, we are like in the opposition again against a regime, you know, like it's like before the wall came down, we are fighting against the socialist leader, today we are fighting against Merkel. And for them it's the same, and this is what is crazy. But this is also because this kind of populism adapts very good in this kind of historical experience they lived. To persuade people to feel betrayed and socially disadvantaged, populists are mostly using the issue of immigration, as I told you, and discrimination against minorities such as Muslim or Jews or homosexual. But we will see later that they can also use climate change. And it is very important as well to understand the shock of capitalism among Eastern Germans, and that's like, so you have the traditional, as you have the experience I had in the socialism, being in opposition against the regime, against elite, because in the GDR you have a small elite ruling the whole country, a kind of authoritarian system. So, and then you have the shock of capitalism, and here again I want to quote Wilhelm Heidmeier, the socialist, the German, who said, "Financial capitalism has absolutely no interest in social integration because it's only about competition and exploitation. That means groups are still evaluated in the signs of inequality, usefulness, usability and efficiency. This thinking invades society and the attitudes of people and groups." So what he wanted to say, that this kind of neoliberal thinking is like a catalyst, for this kind of populism. So you see that it's not like only black and white, you have many factors or many paradigms and many like circumstances who leads to this kind of new wall building. And today, depending on the region, 20 to 30% of the people in Germany vote for the AfD. And in Sachsen-Anhalt, where my mother lives now, every third voter has voted for the right-wing populist. And I want to quote just my mom because it's very nice. She said, because she supports the Greens. And she told me that, yeah, I have a lot of strange friends and colleagues, and they were so kind, and normally And suddenly they start to talk about foreigners, she said. And then she said, but we don't have even foreigners here. And this is a crazy thing. They never make any experience with foreigners, neither in a conversation or anything, but they have a problem. And this shows exactly what happened, because in Sachsen-Anhalt, where she lives, is like a very countryside, very small cities, not capitals, nothing, and really don't have a lot of foreigners. So it's incredible. So now we're like changing the subject to tell you the other version, because I want to confront you with two versions. We have one version, the upcoming new walls of nationalism and separation, and on the other hand we have a kind of evaluation in the world, or development in the world, in the history we are also living right now, and we are living this version of history, or of contemporary history right now, in parallel. So this is what is for me very interesting. So we have a parallel world, and we can, on the other side, this kind of fake wall thinking, as I call it. I don't know if it's in English this, but I like this expression. So why I'm talking about the World Climate Parliament? Because we have a nice kind of parallel history. Since the early 90s, we know that climate change threatens our planet. I know that scientists know it much far longer, like they know it since the 70s or even far more. But until the 90s is in the discussion. So we know that it threatens our planet, our societies, our future. And in the time where when Germany was reunified and the wall came down, the climate issue came up. This is very interesting. In 1988, 1 year before the wall came down, a first commission on the protection of the atmosphere was formed in the German parliament. In 1992, we had the first summit in Rio de Janeiro, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the so-called Earth Summit. The output of this conference was quite strong. And it was the birth of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. This is the legal basis for the annual UN Climate Summit, known as the COP. I explain you everything to explain you this image, because what is also like a coincidence, or a nice coincidence of the history, in 1995 we had the first summit of this COP climate conference in Berlin. So in the reunified Berlin, we have the first COP. And for the first time ever, the whole world, like nearly all countries, came together to discuss climate change as a global challenge. Since then, we had 24 of these summits, and the next is taking in Madrid, like in 2 weeks. So we have this kind of alternative idea to confronting nationalism, because here you see all countries, every seat is one nation, and you have 197 nations coming together with the diplomats. And the whole, you must imagine that a COP, or this kind of climate summits, is 20 to 30,000 people come together. It's diplomats, it's politicians, it's activists, businessmen, journalists, everybody, and from nearly all countries. And the COP could be described, I think, as our first world parliament to define international solutions for stopping climate change. And as I want to tell you also, it's not only one ecological problems we are facing here. These 197 diplomats from all the countries talking about transformation of their societies, of their nations, of their economies, of everything. It's not only just, okay, we're thinking, okay, how to protect the forests, or I don't know, some small ecological problem. They are talking about the transformation of the whole world. So that's why I think we can say it's a parliament, because they have to discuss a lot of things, when you do want to do this kind of transformations. So when I took part in my first COP was in 2009, and for me it was a revelation. I understood for the first time that what it means when we say the world is a village. I saw how many people are working on the same issue, and and the issue was a secured future, and above all, climate justice. And I saw also that this kind of international collaboration is means to destroy borders, to destroy walls. Because of course it's only a minority of the society who will meet here, but this is the important people meet here. You know, it's not like it's people who decide in their countries and their politics, and then when they meet in these kind of conferences once a year to talk about the transition of the whole world, and they need to work together because you cannot battle against climate change only in your country. This is impossible. This is a complete opposite of nationalism, because you cannot fight climate change in your country. You need to work with, you need multilateralism to fight this problem. But the main topic in these conferences are also, of course, there are also a lot of conflicts, and this is what the world and democracy is about, of course. And the main subject, or the biggest problem of this World Climate Parliament is climate justice. So, what does climate justice mean, and what's the relation with populism and walls? This is now on our next complicated topic. So, actually, these, the climate justice, the populism, and the walls have a lot in common. After my first COP in Copenhagen, as a COP is the climate conferences in Copenhagen in 2009, I realized, coming back to my story, that climate change is the topic of the 21st century. I began to travel, and through many countries I traveled to investigate the consequences of climate change on the ground, to talk with people. I was curious how one physical problem can affect people across the whole world. And on the one hand, it makes us more united, and on the other hand, it divides us more than ever. And this is a kind of conflict I was dealing with this conflict like the last 20 years, and this is like what is for me impressive to see. And I realized very quickly this topic is very hot. Not only because the higher average temperatures are threatening our ecosystems and species, it's more about the global dimension of the problem. Our way to live and produce is heating the earth, and we have no other choice than to change it. And this sentence don't come from a political party or from a political leader or it comes from science. You know, it's like, it's not something somebody invented or like a normative or moral thing. It's a fact. So this means a massive transition in ecological and social transformation. And the point is also that the fossil world we live in now, with or without climate change, we can also take it apart, this produces a lot of social injustice. So also without climate change, you know, and with climate change we think with them even more. So poor people everywhere suffer more from pollution, for example, than rich people do. And this has nothing to do with climate change, you know. This is like the situation, the status quo. And I have one example for you. I took one example from the States. The American College of Preventive Medicines claims, I quote, "Today in the United States, low-income households and people of color are disproportionately affected by indoor and outdoor air pollution. 3 times as many blacks compared with whites die from asthma. And among children, this rate increases to 5 to 1. So this is incredible, and this is like an injustice, nothing have to do with climate change. This is what's happened every day, in everyday life, you know, and this is like a situation. So, and for me it's like climate change is a problem on the top, with like, is a catalyst for all the problems we already have. But it doesn't mean so, oh, we lived very nice all the time and suddenly come climate change, we have to change. No, there are already a mass of existing problems. Climate change on the top is a cherry on the cake, as I say. So, and the least developed countries in Asia and Africa suffer more, of course, from climate change and global warming that we created in the industrial world the last 200 years. And there it comes from environmental justice to climate justice. And these least developed countries suffer by also by being like the kind of dustbin of the Western world. For example, when it comes here, we have the computer recycling. The products we don't want anymore, it's good enough for these people, and we export them, the waste, etc. And in the same time, they suffer from the pollution, the air pollution, the atmospheric pollution we did like 200 years ago. This is like the 2 points I want to point it out in these pictures. So the wall here is between industrialized countries and poor ones. And we have the wall also inside our society and between the north and the south. So we see different kind of walls. So the problem is we have a way for adapt to climate change. We in Germany have, you in the US have, but the problem is that these kind of countries, I visited for example here is Benin, they don't have. And to show you this kind of climate injustice, I want to tell you two stories. I investigated in two parts of the world. Just, I think with a story we can imagine more what it means, because also justice and injustice are very abstract words, and I want always to put it in stories to explain it better. So I start with Benin. I don't know if you know where it is. It's a very small, it's not a small country, but oh, I need some, sorry, I'm a little warm, the technician. Benin is here, is in West Africa, so it's between Togo and Nigeria, just to give you an idea where it is. And in Benin, I went in for an investigation, and I, among other farmers, I visited Jeremiah, is him. He's a small-scale farmer in the north of the country, and his village is very isolated, far away from any city. And a long time he grew cotton, and along with cashew nuts, this is the only export product Benin has. You must imagine, cashew and cotton is the only export product this country have, yeah, just to give you an impression. So with the help of pesticides from Bayer, a German company, he managed to expand his production first. Today his soil, so is the soil you see, is completely destroyed, and Jeremiah is desperate. You couldn't really call it soil in fact today, it's like a kind of sand, you know, it's like there's nothing lives inside, it's without fertility completely, it's dust. And additionally, this is a cherry on the cake again, the region has become drier and drier. The weather has become unpredictable, and sometimes there are heat waves with temperatures about 113 Fahrenheit and more. And little tornadoes blow away the last fecund soil. I saw these kind of tornadoes, it's quite I never saw it in my life before because we don't have it in Germany, or very little. It's like small tornadoes going over the field and take away the soil, and this very frequently. So Jeremiah, the farmer you see, is 70 years old. He and his family live in a small house without electricity, and the water comes from a well in the village. If the weather doesn't normalize and he can't adapt his agriculture to heat waves and sterile ground, he will have to move. So with 70 years. Otherwise, he will have nothing to eat for his family. And where there's nothing to eat, there's no life. So they try now with a program, but this is like the first steps, you know, it's very complicated to adapt these kind of people to these changes, to this climate change. And there's one program they're taking part of, they are growing, it's called in English Angola peas, and to give nitrogen to the soil and to make it more fertilized again, you know, but this is like a small step to make them stay. And this is just to show that this is his wife, they don't want they cannot imagine to leave this place, you know, it's like for generations they live there, they live in peace, they have enough, of course there's diseases and they don't have hospital, etc. But this is another story, but they never thought of going away from this village. But if you cannot grow any more things, you have to go. This is the kind of thing. I also visited, then after I visited Jeremiah, I visited the Environment Ministry of Benin. And this was a very special experience. It's located in Cotonou, the Environmental Ministry. So you have it, Cotonou is like here on the coast. And it resembles to an old school, you know. I entered and met the person who is responsible for climate change in one of the few air-conditioned meeting rooms. It was really like looking in an old destroyed school. It was a very strange experience. And he told me, we can't help these people. Just protecting our coast, and you see the coast here, so just protecting our coast from the rising sea level is costing millions of dollars. It's impossible for a state like Benin, which doesn't even have a functional waste treating system. So when you think, okay, climate change is a cherry of the cake and it makes the things worse that they already are, in these kind of countries you don't even have a normal infrastructure. How you can think to make climate protection, you know, a climate adaptation? This is like something impossible for them. They are struggling with really daily life issues like a waste treating system. This would be a lot for them, you know. But like protecting the coast, or even these farmers very far away inside the country from their from migration, is like an impossible thing for them. So then we have this situation in mind, we're all scared, and we jump to Florida. And this is like this kind of data I collected also because it shows also this kind of injustice, you know. You have the emissions per capita in the US is around 16 tons per capita per year, and in Benin you have 0.59. No, just to and the cars also I like a lot. It's 20 cars per 1,000 residents in Benin, imagine. And in the US, it's 500. So we have the kind of, only the daycare speak its own language. So yeah, I want to present you the next protagonist from the second story. This is Chris Burke. He is an environmental activist at Pine Key. Perhaps someone of you know him, I don't know, because it's not far away from here. And Pine Key is an island of the Florida Keys, and Chris Burke is very clever. He just, in this moment when I met him, he just sold his house on the beach and bought a very cheaper one on the island on a hill. And he said to me, people don't realize that the sea level rise is not going to stop, but it's getting more dangerous. They are kind of naive and they don't want to know. So Burke and his family choose to get a little more money and to have safety, because the real estate near the sea on the Florida Keys, as you all know, is incredibly expensive. So it's very expensive. And what I don't understand is, I don't know what is the actual situation, but like 2 years ago when I saw the last time the prices don't decrease. They're perhaps rising or stable, but they don't decrease. And with all the problems they already have there, and this is what is incredible. But nevertheless, the Keys in general have a future full of problems. Even if Burke have now a house on a hill, he is like also facing the other problems. So, because they have like increasingly frequent floods, and this leaves streets and houses underwater. I don't know if you saw, yeah, this is the Keys. I don't have to show you this, you know, you all know, and Big Pine Key is here. Yeah, and you have these kinds of floods. I'm in a Facebook group. It's called Florida Keys Swamping Group or something like this, and they're swamping. And they posting regularly photos, and I always like, and it's more and more. And this year it's terrible, and you have a lot of streets and a lot of houses underwater. And they are like making videos how they go with the cars through the flooded streets and everything. They cannot go out of their houses, etc. Yeah. So and the reason for this is the so-called king tides, and they are so strong that the salt water from the sea reaches the inner center of the small island, and then these king tides, the water stay inside on the roads or inside the island. It doesn't drain off and remains like a small lake. And it's killing a whole ecosystem. When I can, when I come back, go back here, you see here, it's like a picture from not the moon, but you know, a desert or something. And this is because the plants can resist salt water. This is what Chris Berg is called the slow dying process of the islands. So it's not like the island, so as we say, rising sea level rises, oh, in one moment the island is not there anymore. No, of course, it's a slow process, and it's already started. And meanwhile, people have more problems with floods. Then they can't take their cars, they can take their cars to go to work. The cellars are flooded, and so there are a lot of things, you know, they have to pay, they have to clean, they have to pay, the assurance. It's a whole mess. It's a whole mess. But when we think back to Benin, okay, these are problems, of course, but here we're in the US. And we are in the US, and we have the money for adaptation. And what is interesting for the Florida Keys, I'm following up this story. Now, 3 years after I was doing this investigation, now we have a sea level rise pilot project on the Keys for rising the highway number 1. This is the big highway we saw here, the highway number 1. And the problem is that it's the highway to bring the tourists from Miami to Key West. You all know this. So, and this is like when it's flooded, nobody can go through, problem for the tourism. So they don't want to lose the tourists, so they're trying to raise the highway, and it costs $3 to $4 million, but only for 1 mile. And you can imagine rising the whole highway till Key West, hundreds of kilometers. So this is incredible expensive, and this is only the highway, you know. When we think on the properties, what's it with the properties? Okay, we have a high road, but the properties are underwater. What you do with tourism then? So this is only the beginning of a very, very expensive process to keep these islands alive. But the problem is, okay, you have the possibility to do this here. Countries like Benin don't have, just to show you. But even for the US, this is a lot of money. So we have like a little bit the dimensions. The wet feet we had. So then we come to the last the last part of this journey, because in the same time. It's exactly here in Florida where I've met many people denying the undeniable, the climate change. For example, you know, your president, he say climate change don't exist, it's a hoax, but also a large number of US think tanks and local politicians and Florida residents. When I was there and I was talking with the people on the Keys, there are people like, there are victims from these floods, and they told me, no, it's not climate change, it's a bridge or something else, I don't know, but it's not climate change now, we will fix it, you know. They told me this like 3 years ago, but it don't goes away. And interesting is also that in this Facebook group, I'm following a little bit the discussions, the people like posting the images, but they don't say, oh my God, this is climate change and we need to do something, perhaps we can start with some, no, nothing. They don't talk about climate change at all. I think there's one post where somebody posts something from the University of Florida, like a kind of study or something, but there was no comment under this post. And if not, they're just posting the photos and said how terrible it is and that it should end. It should end, no, please, and the weather, but nobody talk about climate change. Very interesting. So here is, for example, another experience I made in the US. 1 year ago, I attended in New Orleans, a conference from the Heartland Institute. I don't know if you know this institute or this think tank. Some of them, some of you, yes. And it's like the global leading climate denier think tank. They helped, or they are very proud, or they told me in an interview that they are very proud to help the US withdraw from the United Nations climate agreement. So they are very proud of this. And what is interesting, that Heartland is not only the climate denier think tank, but also like a kind of right-wing nationalist think tank with a very neoliberal agenda. So when we think back, we already had our in the beginning of my speech, we talked about populism, nationalism, etc. So I come back here to this, and this is a very, very crucial connection we made. Because these people, the same people from the Heartland Institute, talk openly about freedom and liberty, about a free market and a fossil fuel industry that help to build up the national wealth of countries. Their freedom is a 20th century idea. Also I was in this conference in the Heartland Institute, and there it likes I have like a, okay, I understand a little bit more what's happened here, you know, when I saw they're like showing, for example, patriotic films with the American flag and the people yay and the coal mines and you know these kind of things. And I understand they're standing for this 20th century idea, an American white family, heterosexual family, 2 SUVs, a nice house, and the right to consume as much as they want. And this is the image they defend and they want to keep. Yeah, regardless of the costs for everybody else, you know. And for example, when we think of the reconstruction of the road in the Florida Keys, this is paid by the taxpayers, you know. Somebody have to pay this road. So it's not the company, it's not the think tank, it's not the fossil fuel companies paying this, it's the taxpayer. So we are paying this all. Yeah, and when it comes to private property on national disaster in general, when we make like the summary of what we saw, wealthy people are always better protected than the poor. It starts also in Florida, you know, when you have a property and you don't have, you cannot afford like to protect your house, it's a problem, you know. Perhaps when you have money, you can make it, can rise it also, I don't know, you can protect it in any ways. When you don't have money, you can't. Or when we think of the communities in Africa, how they can protect themselves from heat waves, you know. They don't even have electricity. They don't even can think on air condition, you know. And this is a kind of different levels of problems or like different dimension. But in fact, this is everywhere the same. Wealthy people can adapt, the others not, or less. So, as we can, it's a little theoretical, but very easy to understand. Just make it to show, make a little this little graph to show you a little bit the different dimensions because it's becoming complex. So climate change heats up existing conflicts and social division. So our borders. It strengthens and multiplies existing walls in our heads and in reality. Build up a so-called fossil fuel century. So we have these 3 kinds of most important walls or borders, I think, in the head. And the first is the social division in all countries, as we have it like with, for example, the asthma for the poor people and the rich within country. Then you have the north-south division. And now I like to talk at the last thing about the ideological division, what is very important also. Of course, different perspectives have already existed, especially as ideology has already existed, especially in my country, you know. Of course, you can see you have a right to have a left-wing or right-wing position, neoliberal or socialist or whatever, you know. I know this because we have in our country, in one country, capitalism and socialism, or so-called socialism. So 2 systems which have battled each other for 40 years. And these battles, and this is also a things we learned in the last 30 years, these battles are not over. This wall still exists. So, for example, when we have actors like Heartland, Trump, Bolsonaro, the German AfD, and other right-wing populists, they have something in common. They don't want change. They are the so-called ghosts from the 20th century. And the rummage in an old toolbox from when Berlin was separated. Climate policies for them are a left-wing project. This is very interesting. Something invented by the left explained, something invented for the left to take over the power. So the left take over the power by climate policies. And they explain this by these possible reasons. I just tell you some reasons. They tell it's a socialist project because we transfer money to the poor countries. We help the left get into power and establish a kind of eco-socialist dictatorship. And we destroy the leadership of the United States, and it's like a late revenge for the Cold War, you know. These kinds of narrative they are spreading and making this ideological division within the climate change policy discourse. But I ask you, is climate change a leftist construct? Are thousands of scientists communists or hippies? Is United Nations a communist project? Also, this is a quote from the Heartland Conference. Huh? The United Nations, UN, is a communist project. Very interesting. Every reasonable person would, of course, deny this. But the right-wing groups of society need this old ideological wall to build up their narrative against change. So it's not only about climate change, it's about change and transformation they want to stop. And here, like, just a funny anecdote for make you laugh. The funny thing is, under socialism, we didn't care much about environmental rules. So when they say the United Nations or climate change is a socialist or communistic project, I say the GDR environmental policies were far behind of the Bundesrepublik. When I was a kid and visited my grandma in Thüringen, in Erfurt, we had days where it was forbidden to leave the house because of the smog from coal-fired heating and all the dirty, famous Eastern Trabant cars, which are currently pretty unecological. And when we drove through Bitterfeld, you see here, it was like a very industrial area. We had to cover our nose. It was in a train, we're sitting in a train. We have to cover our nose for 20 minutes because it stinks, impossibly. So when somebody tells me the climate change or the ecological project or the climate change policy are socialist or communist, I laugh out loud because I don't think so. The problems is that green groups and left parties are the first to recognize the importance of climate policies. This is like historically the problem why we have this kind of discussion now, and why the right wings try to instrumentalize this issue. And they know that regulations are needed to precede the transformation to a low carbon society. And there we have like an essential point. You need a kind of regulation. You cannot say, okay, the market will rule. No, the market is not in the interest of society. The market is an economical instrument, and you can discuss about this. But when it goes to do transformation and rapidly, as fast, you need a kind of regulation. And this kind of heartland is very strong neoliberal market believers and right wing, and they don't want any regulation, and especially not environmental regulation. So, of course, they use it to say it's a left-wing project. But the other side, also these hardline people has an easy return move. They pretend that the whole world can continue with business as usual. For now, this is much more comfortable than the huge project of change where everybody have to give up something. So this is like the narrative problems we have. We have on the one side, this is the Greta Thunberg, you know, all these, you know, the big manifestation, Fridays for Future, etc. You have a big mass demonstration in the whole world. I don't know if it's very strong in the US, but in Europe it is very, very strong since months, like since 1 year now. But on the other hand, you have like a rollback in the same time, like a kind of groups organizing themselves. I don't know if it's all right wing, you know, but the point is that the right wing instrumentalize these people. And for example, here you have the Fridays for Hubraum. I don't know if you understand the joke, A Hubraum is Hubraum is not an English word. No, it isn't. No, Hubraum is a kind of technically detail of a car, you know, and yeah, a technical detail of the car, and that's why they call themselves Friday for Hubraum or Friday for cars, as you want, you know. This is a kind of German joke. And they're like the people organizing, these people organize them in this kind of Facebook Fridays for Hubraum groups to comment against Fridays for Future and the climate change movement. And what is interesting here, I just put it out, that in one of these groups they say our goal is to become much more than the Greta followers. This is the first goal. And the second is we should end with this climate change hoax. And this is like, okay, they're really starting to organizing themselves in this kind of social media. And this is, for example, a so-called bottom-up initiative, a digital social media bottom-up initiative, you know, where a lot of people come together. And this incredible thing is that these posts and these comments are very, very aggressive. I know you heard already perhaps about this, you know, but this is a kind of this is not only they're against something, this is have a real ideological background, you know. They are pretty like angry against these students. And these are students, you know. These are not like very powerful politicians or think tanks or people who have money. This is only some students, you know, and they are so angry against them. So this is incredible what is happening. So the people are also from the rollback side are also like have other sort of ways of expression to express their anger. This is, for example, in France. I don't know if you heard about this. This is the yellow vest effect, it's called. In France, like 1 year ago, I think Macron wanted to rise up the price of petrol, and the people were so angry that they make a barrier and they block the roads and they go on the street every day, and they were really really aggressive, and they burn down things, and like that he stopped this legislation, and in fact he stopped it. You know, he didn't rose the prices of petrol. So. Yeah, and the point is, yeah, okay, so we have a lot of people who are angry because they have less money in their pockets, but they are not angry because of climate change politics. They're angry because they were angry before, because this kind of climate legislation Macron put is like only the last point in a long story of neoliberal dysregulation and a smaller, or like disconstruction of social politics. So this is like the kind of thing. The problem is how you do the transformation, you know. And if you do it like Macron did it, you have this kind of result, and absolutely the wrong communication of the problem. So what we learn from this is that climate change must become a part of our identity, and this is like very crucial, I think. Also crucial because that we don't let us that the right-wing people cannot instrumentalize this subject against the people. So, for example, when you have the flat Earth theory, for example, you know, and nobody who is seriously taken in the society say, yeah, the Earth is flat, you know. You said, okay, you have some funny people who do this, okay, but never one say, okay, yeah, we fight about this politically. Or you say all the people who are not flat earthler are left wing. No, you don't say this. You know, never would occur in your mind, you know. And this is like a scientific fight, but it's not politicized, you know. Okay, you have some people believe this, but okay, they are funny. And you have the other side, okay, you have the scientific evidence. So, and climate change must be the same, you know. So climate change itself is not political, you know. This is the point, you know. It's not left or right wing. So we have to see it, I think, in the narrative. We have to build up new narratives with new perspectives and take it out of the political battle. So this is a little bit, this is what I want to say. Because what does it mean being part of the identity? It is this is not what I'm saying, this is what big climate change communicators is saying. We need to ask ourselves, what is important to me, you know? And for the normally for people are important love, nature, community, home, family, freedom, everything we need every day, you know, to exist and to be more or less happy, or to continue our lives and don't suicide ourselves, you know, these kind of things you need. And then you ask yourself, okay, if climate change threatens all these values, I have to do something, you know. And this is the point, you know. This is nothing about socialism or left or right or green. This is like, okay, my life is threatened, or my values are threatened by these kind of things. Okay, I have to do something. So, what is the summary of all this big journey we made in the last 50 minutes? So I think the question is not what I have to give up, you know. For example, this kind of yellow vest effects, you know, the people like, oh no, this is more expensive, I don't want, you know, I don't want to give up my car. So this is not the question. Or what they want to take away from me. The question is, what could I do to protect the things and the person I'm really attached to? And how could we imagine another future, and perhaps a better one? Because I hope that I could show in the speech that the 20th century was not the best we could ever have. This is the point. We already have a lot of problems with this kind of fossil fuel system, so why we don't change it? Because it's not, it's far away from being perfect. So, and of course, yes, climate change is a crisis, but it's also a chance. And this is the point also, what is very important to understand. It's not, that's why perhaps crisis is also a terrible word. Why we don't see it as a chance to overcome these walls from the 20th century, and in the heads and the real walls, by remembering those things in life that really matter to us. This is also like a kind of, message I want to show you. And that we become perhaps more aware that in our world everything is more connected. And this also, we have the growing up nationalism, we have all the crazy people who want to build walls, real walls and walls in the head, but we are also more and more connected. I feel this. So for example, Florida and Benin, Germany and Asia, we're becoming closer every day, virtually, physically, and also by talking. And so it would be a pity if we don't use that to overcome our walls, I think. Huh? And I mean both walls, the physical ones and the ideological ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
I'd just like to make a statement that I really enjoyed, that the fact that you incorporated your story. Okay, I'm old enough to have lived in the Germany that was divided, and I also was excited to visit Berlin with American students soon after the fall of the wall. And I was brought up by a grandmother who lived through the war and all the fears, and then, you know, they were afraid. And I also can see the way you have built it with your story, with your personal story. I can also see for the first time really how important it is. And I like the way you ended this talk by showing, all right, so people check what's important to you. And this is what you don't give it up, you work for it. And I'm sorry, I'm not very good, I still use plastic bottles. But I am definitely having a better idea. And I certainly understand more about the connections. I'm a bit frightened about the America I live in right now. It's, I'm wondering where we go from here, but there are plenty of people who will get this and who will protect themselves and their loved ones and their lives.
Yeah, that was very important to me. I don't want, in Germany or Europe, we have sometimes a special perspective on the States. So I don't have to tell you something about the States because you are from here. But our perspective sometimes is also a little bit too negative. You know, of course you have this president and everything, okay, but also we also in our history didn't have all the presidents we wanted, you know. This is the one, and the people are not responsible for the presidents, you know, and what they're doing. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is what I also talk with Will a lot is, for me, as I'm doing little studies also or investigations in climate change communication, for example, or other, like in climate change science in general, the US is very progressive, you know, and you have the biggest part of science are here in the US. Of course, Trump is cutting the financial grants and everything, and for the universities, and this is a terrible situation, but in the last 10 years or 20 years, the US was the pioneer in climate change communication and climate science in general. You have the most of the data, the studies, the science is here, you know, and so you have like a kind of, for me, from an outer perspective, from far away, it's like, okay, you have this kind of paradox. You have very special people who are in power right now, you know, you have this 20th century's narrative I try to describe, but in the same time you have a lot of very progressive people who already work a lot about this subject. So yeah, it's both you have here. It's my perspective. You can tell me your perspective, but it's my, I can learn from you also.
But I'm so surprised how politicized it has all become, the climate change.
Yeah, this
Thank
you
for making that so much clearer for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on trying to extract this sort of ideology from the political arena. I know that the most effective changes in people's minds have been when the sensory experience of climate change has hit home. So the farmers in Oklahoma and Texas, in a Stanford study a few years ago, when asked about climate change, they may still be voting Republican, but their cattle are dying and their soil's drying up, and so they feel it in their land. You know, they can sense that. But in your cells there, the one you have in the upper left is freedom. You know, Americans have this crazy-ass individualism. And part of that is the freedom to do what they want to do. And so it's more than just, you know, what's important to you. There's a need to really change the temporality of social life, that we understand things in longer futures and past, that those things are connected. That we have good science, but the science isn't necessarily, like historical science, isn't necessarily marketed to people or provided to people in ways that puts perspective on futures. They see it as the has-been, or, you know, object lessons of the extinct or some such. So, and it's certainly not going to be trans-historical or trans-cultural. Every culture is going to have, you know, their different perspectives, as you well know from your own work. You've been traveling all over the world. So, in my mind, it's going to take some, like, global directive, some kind of global initiative. And that's why it's really shameful that the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Accord.
Yeah, the point is how people, and this we talked very shortly with you also before the speech, and even if the people feel that there's something going on, like in Florida, the example I showed, like the road is flooded. You know, you go out of your house, the first thing you see is a flooded road, and you cannot take your car. This is a very crucial experience, you know, it's something really in your daily life. It's like, wow, I cannot. So this is disturbing of freedom in my eyes, and this is really the freedom of consuming is not a freedom, but the consuming, the freedom of that my house is dry and I can go to work and live my life. This is my freedom. I mean, we need to claim the words back, you know, because, for example, the Heartland Institute is using these words and building up these narratives.
Kind of nut jobs. Total nut jobs.
Yeah.
They're very powerful nut jobs.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they are very successful with these narratives, you know. This is the point, and
Yeah.
I think we need, or in general, you have to claim back these kind of words and expression, and it's incredible to that neoliberalism, for example, is linked to freedom. I don't understand. So this is the job they made the last 70 years, you know, to put these kind of words together, you know, and to explain it. And so, yeah, I think, and for example, the so-called left or the left is not so strong in claiming the words. They didn't manage to get socialism to split socialism from the so-called socialism we saw in the past. Of course, the socialism we saw in the GDR is not the socialism everybody expected. It was like a terrible system. It was not socialism. It was not democratic. Was nothing. So, but it how to say it blamed the whole idea. You know, so the idea is dead. And the left didn't succeed to re-establish this kind of, in the beginning, good ideas they had, you know. But yeah, and this is the difference. I think that the right wing, as they have more easy answers, the narratives are stronger. This is, I think, the problem. But
I very much appreciated your talk, and again, I really did like the connection of your biography to these larger issues, because that is one point of entry for all of us, is to think through that way. But what I was struck as you were talking was I was reminded of something I've been sort of percolating a little bit. So the advance of climate change is unstoppable. It can't be reversed. The data is very clear. We can only rise to meet some of the changes, maybe diminish the worst of the effects, but the horses out of the barn, the boulders rolling down the mountain, the locomotives set loose, whatever your metaphor. And I'm struck by the notion that these pre-existing inequities, these pre-existing contestations on matters of nativism and race and gender and political economic power and neoliberal mastery, they fit into the ecosystem of climate change. Climate change will be the ecosystem where all those things are fought now in the coming century. It will be the background narrative of all of them. It's not a separate problem to be considered like all the other problems, but by its very nature, because it is grounded in the physics of the world that we have made for ourselves, it becomes the network, the framing story of all these other things. So therefore it has the effect of both multiplying their cruelties and their disparities, and perhaps also giving us a context for reimagining nativism and racism and sexism and all those other things. And I wonder if you have this sense that what I've just said is coming to awareness, for example, in Germany, that it's the background narrative of all the other narratives. Is that happening, you think, in Europe, or the places, the people that you've talked to? Have they realized yet that this has slid from being one of many concerns to being the background of all the other concerns?
yeah, especially I think the right-wing people, or the role, I think the other part I want to show, like the shadow of the climate change movement, the rollback movement, the 20th century movement, they are feeling exactly what happened, and they see exactly what you are saying, that everything is connected, and this transition is not only a small transition for one ecological problem, and that's make them frightened, you know, because they know that with their values and their ideas they cannot go any longer, and this is not the 21st century thinking, you know. They can't. Transformation with this kind of ideas you cannot do. So they have to change their values and their thinking, and of course they don't. But that's why they are conservative or right wing, because they don't want. But I think they are already exactly understanding what happened, and they're afraid of this, because of course this point is you can do the transformation in many ways, and I'm not sure anymore if the climate justice transformation we need will really happen, you know. I think perhaps I get more and more a little bit depressed, I'm sorry to give you this input, but I think we'll have a kind of transformation, but we will continuing with this kind of 20th century thinking, and this will be a problem, and this will multiply the problems in the future. So for example, with the adaptation, you know. We will start, or we start already with adaptation, you know. For long, the states in general, the countries didn't even want to do adaptation. Now they do adaptation. Or they do even more adaptation than mitigation in this moment, you know. Mitigation is to reduce CO2, yeah. Because they say, okay, this is something that affects us, okay, we can defend ourselves, we build roads higher and the bridges higher, okay, this we can do, you know. But it don't change anything in terms of the transition or the problem, you know. Still, you have the problem get worse and worse, and the injustice get worse and worse, and you won't change. The climate change justice will stay, you know, and it will get bigger when you make this kind of transformation. So that's why I show you the problem with the poor and the rich. And so we will have a kind of transformation which is a very injustice transformation. So the rich will protect themselves. They will build like, we already have these kind gated communities, you know, very well protected, air conditioned, whatever, with everything you need on hills, or I don't know. It's like a dystopia. You can really tell me another opinion. If you are more courage than me, please tell me. But I get more and more this I'm afraid that it will be like this, you know, and that's why I showed you in the speech a little bit this contrast we are facing. So that already injustice problems will get bigger and bigger, and the transformation we will do is not that the injustice will decrease, but it will increase. So, and this can happen. So we do something about climate change, but we do it in a bad way, if you want. This can happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I might segue from that comment, because I think Terry's right that the background narrative will be climate change, but the political response can stay very polarized to that background narrative, exactly for the reason you suggested. And one of the chief walls in the future, and you I think alluded to it with regards to gated community, but the chief wall in the future might be the wall between those in the lifeboat and those out of the lifeboat. Garrett Hardin had this notion of lifeboat ethics that he created back in the 60s when the thought was overpopulation was the big issue we needed to deal with. But it goes perfectly well for climate change, where there's going to be relatively well-to-do people, communities, and nations that would consider themselves in the lifeboat, and the people on the outside of the lifeboat, if you let them in, the idea is they'll swamp it and everybody goes under. So that's going to be a wall that's going to be erected, and it can very well be erected along similarly polarized political ideologies.
That's why adaptation goes along with the right-wing strategy, or with the right-wing thinking or narrative, you know. Still the AfD is now saying, yeah, now we have to cancel every mitigation policies, all mitigation policy we have to cancel, they say, but we can have like a little budget for adaptation. This is okay. We don't believe in climate change, but if perhaps there is a possibility that there is climate change, we have our little budget for adaptation. So this is okay for the right wing, you know, and this is exactly what I mean with the bad transition, you know, when you do only this but I imagine, you know, like the problems they have with migration. You know, imagine when you don't do the right transformation, so you don't do mitigation, you don't reduce CO2, you do only adaptation, a lot of people would come. What they will do, they will shoot everybody, or what they will do, you know. This is like, okay, you can do another kind of transition, but you create incredible problems more, and I cannot imagine how to solve this, you know. We are already in a big shit, but then I cannot imagine even what they will do, you know. And I mean, I don't have problems with migrants. They have, you know. They needed to do something, you know. I don't have a problem if Jeremiah come to Germany, you know, my Benin farmer from Benin, you know. But they have a problem. So they should do against, they should have a reason to stop climate change, that he don't have to move, you know. I'm joking a little, you know, but you see what I mean, you know. It's completely irrational how they are arguing for me, you know.
So you're a journalist and a writer, and this is clearly something that requires an interdisciplinary discussion, and a lot of us are students, and it's really difficult to like take this and move it somewhere and move it into a career and field. So my question is, what fields and arenas are these discussions happening in? Because it's really daunting this young to be like, yeah, I want to go into the political arena. It's disgusting and I don't want to be a part of it, but it seems like, it's like just to be frank, but it seems like that is where this change is going to have to happen, where this discussion is going to have to move. Because I've had many discussions here on campus, but it's like I need to move them outside of campus at this point.
Yeah, it's a good question, you know. I choose to be a journalist, you know, because exactly that I don't want to enter in politics because I don't want it, you know, like I prefer being the observer, you know. But of course, yeah, of course, I can give you any advice, you know, because I'm not a politician, you know. But of course, if you want to move something, you need to go in the institutions or in the parties, in politics to change something, of course. But what I always say, like, because a lot of activists asking me, because I'm doing also like speeches on climate communication and how to talk with people about climate change, and what are like the traps. And then after they say, yeah, what we can do to change. And I say, yeah, the most important thing is that you need, I think activists, a lot of activists have problems to discuss, you know. They need to think about how they're discussing with people. This is really important, you know. When they come and saying to people, don't take a flight, don't take you are losing a plastic cup, and like denunciating people, for example, this is not the way to convince somebody, you know, for example, you know. And this kind of, I don't want to do a speech about this, but this is a kind of thing I think people have to be trained, you know, to discuss, because it's a new subject for everybody. And you know it because you do a workshop or something, and it's like really in the minds or in the mainstream, it's like for 10 years perhaps, you know, before it was like a nerd topic also in Europe, you know. And so it's normal that when you have a new kind of phenomenon, it's not new, but for us it's new, that we need to learn to talk about it and to argue about it and to think about it, what is possible, you know. And so I think the most important thing is when people really want to be activists and convince people, they need to be trained in rhetoric, in arguing, in discussing, in narrative, in also imagining another future, you know. So because this is what we are discussing a lot in Germany right now. Okay, but what is this transformation? What it should be look like, you know? And how we can tell the people, this is what the activist I'm quoting, activist saying, how we can convince the people that this future can be better than is what we have now. You know, it's not a change into something bad where we don't have any more plastic cups and no more SUVs anymore, this is terrible. No, we need to tell the people, hey, today is not the best world we have, you know, we can have better, you know. And perhaps it's nice to take the bicycle because you are less fatter, or to eat less sugar because then you don't have problems with your health. I don't know, you know, these kind of things, because a lot of things, problems we are creating with this old system are really not good for us, you know. And it's not good for our health, not good for our families, not good for the planet. So, and these kind of narratives, it was just an example, you know, these kind of things that people have to learn. To imagine, learn to imagine, to have fantasy, to think about the future. So, yeah, and that's why we have professors who are organizing interdisciplinary workshops on climate change, I think.
So we are slowly but surely coming up on the 2 hour mark.
2 hours already.
We have been going a long time. Unless there's a last final question.
I know I need
We've posed lots of questions. Thank you very much.